Hi, I'm Mark Thalman, and thank you for coming. Thank you, Barbara, for inviting me, and thanks for all the great readings we've heard tonight. I want to share with you a little story about William Stafford that nobody's ever heard before. Back in the early 80s, I was living in the hills of Metzger between Tigard and Portland. Joseph Bruchac, he was the editor of Greenfield Review, was staying at my house for a few days while he gave a reading at Portland State University. And the next night, there was a dinner for William Stafford and Joseph Bruchac at Penny Avila's house. And Penny Avila was the poetry editor for the Oregonian at that time. Then the following day, I came home from work, and Joe was on the phone, and as I come through the door, he hands me the phone, which seemed kind of strange to me, and he says, "William Stafford wants to talk to you." Joe hands me the phone, and Bill Stafford says to me, I want to come to your house and pick up Joe, take him to the airport tomorrow. How do I get there? And so I started telling him, and he didn't recognize any of the street names. How about tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, we'll meet you at the Sears parking lot at Washington Square. Next day comes, sure enough, we wheel into the parking lot, and there's Bill Stafford leaning up against his car with all these empty parking spaces around him. You wouldn't expect to find the most important or most well-known poet in Oregon in the middle of an empty parking lot. And certainly not leaning up against his car enjoying the sunrise. And of course, he was a very early riser, and that's well documented that he would get up early and write every day before his family got up. So I imagine he did that before he came to the parking lot to pick up Joe Bruchac. And I waved to them goodbye because I had to go to work since I teach in Hillsborough. And they waved back to me. And I so wish that I could have been in the back seat of that car driving to the airport with them just to hear the conversation. Just a little anecdote about him. He was a marvelous reader, and if you ever saw him read, a lot of times he wouldn't even have books. He'd just come up to the microphone and he'd have a little pad of paper or spiral notebook in a pocket, which he'd kind of produce and hold in his hand, and you could hardly even see it. And he would give a whole reading for maybe an hour that way. And he was very conversational. You never knew exactly when a poem was beginning or ending the way he talked sometimes. So you actually had to go, oh yeah, that's, he's into a poem now. I get excited, of course, when something gets accepted, but I was equally more excited when this poem got accepted from the South Florida Poetry Review, fall of 1988, because when I opened it up, here was a poem by William Stafford right across the page from mine. But I was also, very blessed because Joe Bruchac said, well, have you ever sent anything to Stafford to read of yours? And I said, no, I'd never do that. I'm just too shy. And he says, well, you really should send him your manuscript. So I did, and that manuscript is catching the limit, and it's got some words from William Stafford on the back, because Bill Stafford sent me a very, very nice letter about the manuscript. This is the poem by Stafford called For You. It is a secret still, but already your tree is chosen. It has entered a forest for miles and hides deep in a valley by a river. No one else finds it. The sun passes over not noticing. But even while you are reading, you happen to think of that tree, no matter where the sentences go. Talking about other things, the author tries to be casual, to turn from the secret. But you know exactly what is out there. You set forth alone. And my poem on the opposite side of the page is called Marcola Ridge. In a small clearing, while cruising timber, I discover these logs no wider than telephone poles, all laid out, spaced regular and half buried like the ribs of something prehistoric. They had been here, the spotted oxen, snorting steam in the cool morning, a dozen in a team, bulls straining against their yokes, the chain, the dragging weight of logs, heavy as a laden boxcar. Like one of those blocks when the Egyptians built pyramids, that chunk slides slowly over the skids. Usually, a timber will decay so bad, I can break it easy as a loaf of bread. But this wood, worn smooth, has been preserved. Boys swabbed on whale oil to help the load slip. And cussing, as though a hoof had crushed his foot, the puncher must have walloped oxen flanks, condemning each beast to some terrible eternity. I stay a while longer, remembering grandfather, who told me how he worked on such a crew before his memory faded, like this road the forest reclaims, then go about my business of counting trees. And I want to read you one poem from the book that Stafford particularly liked, and he probably liked it because he used to work on those labor crews when he was at the camps. This is called In the Deschutes. I walk this mountain trail with black powder on my back, blasting caps in both hands, a killer of stumps, a maker of pits, shovel dirt, plant the charge, string wire behind a tree, yell, fire in the hole. A chipmunk takes shelter. Fire in the hole. A blue jay mocks. Fire in the hole. I touch it off, and where the stump used to be, the sun, as through a high church window, suspends dust.